Well, hello, and here we are, having survived another hellacious full moon. This was a big one. I can confidently say that probably we are all feeling this one in our own ways and to differing degrees. Even folks who, don't pay attention to the moon cycles are remarking that the energies are really intense right now. The moods are very temperamental. Everyone has just gone buck wild. Pisces moon, too. So, double trouble. If there is going to be some emotional depth surrounding a full moon, it is damn well going to be a Pisces moon. And that's okay. That's good. There's nothing wrong with feeling things and feeling them deeply. And if it takes a Pisces blue moon to wrench those emotions out of us, then so be it. I'm not mad about that. I am excited that it is September tomorrow. Thank the gods for that. I don't have the strength for too much more summer. I've got to be honest. I am so ready for autumn, and yes, that is basic witch shit, but I can't bring myself to care. It was 102 degrees here yesterday. That's hateful, and it's sweaty, and it's unsanitary, and I've done my time. Goodbye, and good riddance. Over it. So, what is on the agenda for today? We are going to talk about synchronicities. And this is another one of those concepts that come from psychology. In particular, one Mr. Carl Jung. He is not only the one who defined the concept, but also coined the term. And we talked a little bit about him during the shadow work episode. And it's interesting to me that Jung was a proponent that synchronicities could sometimes be paranormal in nature. In his book, An Acausal Connecting Principle, Jung wrote, "How are we to recognize acausal combinations of events, since it is obviously impossible to examine all chance happenings for their causality? The answer to this is that acausal events may be expected most readily where, on closer reflection, a causal connection appears to be inconceivable. It is impossible with our present resources to explain ESP, extrasensory perception, or the fact of meaningful coincidence as a phenomenon of energy." He believed that synchronicities were real and that they could not all be explained away as people simply seeing what they want to see or mere coincidence. And this is pretty cool. A lot of Jung's contemporaries were not so open-minded about the possibility that, the universe or spirits or astrology or our own extrasensory perceptions were responsible for sending us these messages. But Mr. Jung himself, the father of analytical psychology, was a believer. Crazy. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Synchronicities, for the purposes of our discussion today, simply describe circumstances that seem to be meaningfully related. In Jung's analytical psychology, the recognition of seemingly meaningful coincidences is a mechanism by which unconscious material is brought to the attention of the conscious mind. So, let's give some examples of synchronicities. The one we've all had, thinking of a friend that you haven't seen or spoken to in a while, and then, suddenly that person calls you on the phone out of the blue. Or seeing the same repeating numbers or series of numbers over and over again in different places, such as, license plates or phone numbers on billboards, Seeing the same animal over and over again, like, a crow or a black dog, to the point that it gets your attention and you can't help but to pause and notice it. There was a movie back in the 90s called Fools Rush In. It's not a particularly good movie. It's a pretty standard 90s rom-com. But the premise was there was this like straight-laced, button-up guy, and he meets this beautiful, free-spirited girl. And at the beginning of the movie, the female main character is on the phone and she's telling her friend that, like, it's not going to work out with me and this guy I've been seeing because the necklace that he gave me broke. Like, it was a bad omen, right? But the male main character overhears this conversation and he's intrigued, but he kind of teases her about it because, that's just such a dopey reason to break up with the guy. But this girl is like, no, this was a sign. And you have to watch for signs and trust them when you see them. But, apparently it doesn't put too much of a damper on his impression of her because they end up having a one-night stand. I won't give a whole rundown of this movie. It's like 25 years old. It's very easy to find, I'm sure. But, there's this third act breakup, and while the guy is still trying to figure out if he did the right thing by ending it with her, suddenly he starts experiencing all these synchronicities that are specifically related to her and the time that they spent together. And he chooses to give them credence and to reevaluate where his head is at, and, eventually he does the right thing. And, of course they end up together because, like, hello, he's Matthew Perry and she's Salma Hayek, and he's a goddamn dumbass if he lets a woman like that slip through his fingers. But I really liked the representation of those signs, of those synchronicities. It's nothing overdone, like, he doesn't hear a voice from beyond the grave or anything like that, but, like, he meets a little girl with the same name as Ms. Hayek's character, and he, runs into a street preacher who warns him that there are signs everywhere and he needs to pay attention, things like that. And again, nobody gave this movie any awards or anything, and I am not even recommending it. I'm just saying that I love the way synchronicities are portrayed in that movie. Because those are the kinds of things that it usually comes down to, is deciding that a sign is in fact a sign. It's a matter of deciding that these messages are meant for us and that they have something important to impart. And we have to get over ourselves and do a little detective work and decide if they mean anything and then what they mean. So that's cool. Synchronicities are real. And for the duration of this conversation, we're just going to agree that that's the case. Where do they come from? Who is sending these messages? Well, I tend to believe that they can come from a few different sources. I believe that the universe, or spirit, is one place that we can receive these synchronicities. It is my experience that these messages, the ones from the universe, the ones from spirit, are going to be related to larger, more consequential issues. Not always, but generally. Again, this is just my experience. Your mileage may vary. We also sometimes get these messages from our own intuition and our own psychic abilities. And this goes back to the example of thinking about somebody you haven't seen for years and then suddenly they call you. Is that a premonition? Yeah, probably it is, but it falls under this loose definition of synchronicity. It's a thought of a person that syncs up with real life communication with them. Ipso facto synchronicity. And I think we also receive synchronicities from our guides and our ancestors sometimes. I had a personal experience where I heard a song over the radio, and I had never heard this song played before in my entire life. Not on the radio, not on a CD, nothing like that. But a deceased loved one used to sing it all the time. That's the only time I had ever heard that song. It was obscure and it's old as hell. And I heard this song on this loved one's birthday. So this was, for me, a validation that this loved one was close and that I was still in his heart and that he wanted me to know it. Now, could this have been a coincidence? Yeah, it totally could have been, but I don't believe it for a second. I know in my heart what I felt at that time, and that was total love and comfort and peace. if it's a guide or a deity trying to get your attention, maybe you'll see the same animal over and over again. It's a good time to take a book of correspondences and see what deities may be associated with a raven or a bear or whatever the animal may be. These spiritual entities have to work a little harder and a little more symbolically to make themselves heard. So, consider those sorts of things. Consult your correspondence book, and, just meditate on that for a little while. And oftentimes we'll start to have an idea of who may be trying to contact us, and then from there, what they might want to tell us. So how do we begin to recognize these messages? How do we recognize them as significant and not a simple matter of coincidence? Well, we just have to start. Part of the process of realizing that these signs are signs is by stopping to notice them. Seeing signs begets seeing signs. The more we pause and acknowledge these messages, the more we will begin to receive messages. We have to first open ourselves to the possibility and to the reality of synchronicity. We can't simply blow these messages off as mere coincidence. When something gets your attention, stop and give it your attention. Think about it. Consider it. If you keep seeing the number 333 all day, stop. Recognize it. Acknowledge it. Say it out loud. This is the third time I've seen this number today. What is the message I'm meant to receive? Even if nothing comes to mind right in that moment, keep doing it. Notice what you're thinking about or doing just before you get these messages. Sometimes that's related. The law of attraction assures us that the more weight we give to these messages, the more attention that we pay, the more of these messages we will attract. And this is an act of faith in itself. It's an act of confidence in our own abilities. It's a show of faith in itself. It's a show of faith that there's a greater power. It's an act of trust that we are powerful, that we are spiritual, psychic beings. Okay. But what is the purpose of these messages? What is the purpose of these synchronicities beyond the actual message itself? Whether it's a message to start worshiping Hecate or to call your granddad, what is the point of receiving strange messages in strange ways? Well, in my opinion, in a nutshell, synchronicities are evidence that we are not just out here alone, on our own, with no outside guidance, just flailing around with no higher power watching over us. To me, synchronicity is evidence that all of this is related. There is a long, beautiful silver thread that links all of us, and it links our past lives and our future lives. It links the actions that we take and the effects that we have on others. It calls attention to the fact that sometimes we are put into another person's path to advance their spiritual journey. It is a damn humbling thing to see synchronicities. And maybe I read it differently than some other people do. Maybe for some, the idea that the universe is invested in their outcome is an ego boost. I don't really see it that way. It's actually more like, hey, me and this dog, which is identical to the dog I had as a kid and whom I've missed and loved for 30 years, were put right in each other's path at this one moment in time so that I would stop and take a breath and remember that all my bullshit isn't that important or special. What's important is that I miss that old dog and he was a good boy. And you know what? He used to get a lot of ear infections, and now that I think about it, Johnny has been acting kind of weird. I wonder if he has an ear infection, and I'll be goddamned, he did have an ear infection. So you see, it's not always that serious, but it can be. we just need to keep ourselves open to all of the messages, the big ones and the small ones. And we just have to trust ourselves. We can't ignore or discredit ourselves when something gets our attention. We are psychic beings, and that psychic ability, it's a muscle. We either use it or lose it. We have to flex it. We've got to pay attention when it happens, and we got to keep looking for those synchronicities so that we'll be ready to recognize them when they come. And they will come. So, have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful rest of August, and we'll talk again in September. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Eli Rowe, and this has been the Middle-Aged Witch Podcast.